Hello, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this RT workshop brought to you this evening by Astral Aviation Consulting on behalf of the UK Civil Aviation Authority. It's great to have you all here with us this evening. Very hot and sunny still here in West Oxfordshire and around, I'm sure it is, hopefully is where you are too, and you've been able to enjoy some of this good flying weather. If you want to stay in the loop with events and resources, please sign up to our mailing list. And you can do this by going to www.astralaviationconsulting.com, or Talitha that's supporting us this evening with the tech has put some links in the chat box, and some reminders in there will go as well. This will get you access to the replay of this evening and a whole host of other safety resources. If you haven't met it before, we haven't been on this before, I'm Matt Lane. I'm one of the Astral Aviation Consulting team. I'm head of training and active single and multi-engined FI and flight examiner. But I'm delighted to introduce the two men of the moment tonight. Is Dave Lewins. Dave joins us from Gloucester, and he's recently taken over as head of ground school at the Castle Air Academy, and he's setting up their new CPLH integrated course. He's also a freelance CPL and PPL helicopter instructor, and also owns his own fixed-wing PPL flying school at Gloucester, flying Diamond aircraft, and does a lot of ground school teaching as well. So it's great to have Dave here, covering both the fixed-wing and the rotary side of things tonight. Welcome, Dave. Also guesting tonight with us, delighted to have us back again, Darren Lewington. Darren's joined us for some previous workshops. Delighted that Darren can be back from training ATC people at Gloucester, which he began his ATC career at Southend 35 years ago. I'm told Darren is an air traffic control instructor, examiner, and is also well known to many of you as Ops Director at Gloucester Airport, where he was for 25 years. Like I say, he's now teaching at Global ATS, one of only two, I think that's right, ATC colleges in the UK, Darren. And also does some really cool stuff with Aeroteaks in terms of recycling aircraft as bits and that as well. But more importantly, he is also one of us. He's a PPL since 1997 and flies a Cub and an RV8. So it's got the full toy box there. Well, great stuff, Darren. Over the next course of 90 minutes, we're going to break the workshop down in some easily digestible chunks. We're going to cover types of service, standard phraseology, some RT procedures, airfield RT, and we're going to be doing a quiz as well. Don't let that worry you. Please don't disappear off. It's just we don't record answers or who says what or anything like that. It's just to try and pull out some knowledge and get some discussion points and that going there as well. And we'll also take Q&A. We'll try and sweep them up at the end, but we'll also try and pick any relevant Q&A that comes up through the evening as well at the relevant bits as well. If you can try and use the Q&A box as well, people often like to put questions and discussions in the chat, and it's great to see people engaging through the chat. But if you use the Q&A box function, that means we definitely won't miss them, and we can click to say when we're answering them as well. Kick us off this evening, though. What I'd like to do first is we will do a short poll. This is a couple of things. It just gives us a feel for the type of flyers that are with us this evening, and it also gives you a chance to figure out how the poll interaction with the Zoom software works as well. If you're watching on demand, you won't be able to interact with the polls, but we've set it up so you will be able to see the answers as we reveal and discuss them as well. But please, if you're watching this on YouTube or something like that, feel free to test your knowledge as we go through as well. So the first poll here as well, we're just interested in what type do you mainly fly? And there's a choice there as well. We recognize that many of you will fly lots of different types, which is brilliant. It's great to have your experience and involvement in there as well. But just what is your main type that you fly there? A few options there as well. And these are the main ones. There might be some of the wacky ones as well that you haven't thought about. So let's have a look at the answers, please. If we can have the poll answers, please, Talitha. Okay, I'm not seeing the poll answers, so we will move on. But we'll try and pull those up as we go through. Thanks. Right, without further ado, What I'm going to do is hand over to Darren. Darren, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, good evening, everybody. And yeah, kick off before we really talk about RT, thinking about the types of service and the standard words and phrases that we're all coming across and we're going to be using on a regular basis. It's really important to kind of understand the differences and what's going on there. So again, see if we can get the poll working this time before we get into that. Have a look at the question there. What type of service is provided at your home airfield? Now, I appreciate some of you might operate from different places, but the place that you operate from most, we're looking to see what type of service you regularly use there. That will almost certainly determine how you've perhaps been taught and how you use the RT up to this point. So I don't know if we've still got a tech issue with the polls there, but I'm not seeing it on my screen. Hopefully you are. Looks like we're having a bit of a hissy fit with the polls at the moment. However, the key thing is that you know the types of service that you're likely to get and the ones that you are receiving. So let's have a look at those in a little bit more detail as we work through. First and foremost, air traffic control, ATC. You'll be using the call signs tower and radar and approach. Sometimes you might also hear director, sometimes rarely you might hear departure. But generally speaking, tower, approach and radar indicates that you're in receipt of a full air traffic control service. We'll cover that in a little bit more detail as we move through. Next on the list there, you can see AFIS, FISO, Aerodrome Flight Information Service Officers at smaller aerodromes using the call sign information. So airfields, Kemble information, Wellsport information, things like that. That's an AFIS service. We also, of course, have the two regional flight information services, London Information and Scottish Information, and both of those are providing a FISO, a flight information service. Airground, of course, uses the call sign radio, smaller airfields with probably just Bob and his dog in the little shed taking the landing fees and talking to you on the radio. Very simple, basic service, call sign radio. More recently, of course, we've had safety com. So where there's no facility provided, you can make the blind calls yourself. It is just you and you're using the call sign traffic. Now we'll work through and have a look at these in a little bit more detail. First up, air traffic control. As we said, you'll find this obviously at major airports, major international airports. You'll also find it at a few of the busier general aviation airfields that we're all likely to be using. And they have full executive control over aircraft, both in the air and on the ground. It's provided by licensed air traffic control officers, and compliance with the clearances, instructions, and the information you get from ATC is mandatory, except, of course, in an emergency or in a case of immediate danger. But an air traffic controller will expect you to comply with the clearance that they give you. Same applies outside controlled airspace, and almost uniquely from a UK point of view, we have quite a few airfields that provide an air traffic control service. It's kind of advisory in its nature, but it's delivered in exactly the same way as a full control service. So places like Cranfield, Shoreham, Humberside, Exeter, so some big airports with some quite chunky aeroplanes flying into them outside of controlled airspace will still deliver that control service. So likewise, ATC will expect you to comply unless you tell them otherwise. Really good word that will come across quite a lot later on. If you can't comply, unable, that's the trigger for them to do something different. So let's move on to AFIS, the next one in the list, Aerodrome Flight Information Service. Now, FISO's procedures changed some years ago, and they now have authority over aircraft on the ground. They'll give you taxi instructions. They'll move you around the airfield in a safe and an efficient manner, send you to the right place, send you to the right point, right the way up to the runway. Entering the runway and using the runway itself is down to you. So you'll get your taxi instructions, but they're not going to clear you to land and take off on the runway. You'll hear the phrase "at your discretion" used. Don't need to read back "at your discretion." Lots of people do. but using the runway comes down to your judgment. However, what they can do to help you do that is advise you, for example, that Cessna's reported on final or the runway's occupied, and they need you to make the decision ultimately whether or not you can use the runway at that time. Remember, if there's an aircraft on the runway, rules of the air state that you cannot land on it. So they might well tell you that the runway is occupied, and they'd expect you perhaps to continue approach. Remember, don't need to read back the at my discretion. You simply tell them what you're doing: landing, lining up, going around, etc. FIS, as we said, Flight Information Service, also provided at the two area control centres, Swanwick and Prestwick, London Information, Scottish Information, and they'll provide you information for safe and efficient conduct of flight. They'll tell you about weather information, they'll tell you about aerodromes that might be closed, they might be able to say about NOTAMs, occasionally about danger areas, can pass estimates for your destination, but they're not going to provide you with any traffic information, and they're not going to provide you with any navigation assistance. They don't have access to the facilities or the ability to do that. Sometimes it can be a bit of a call sign collection service when things are really busy, but it is there for information services should you need them. Finally, in terms of services, and more technically speaking, the next one that we'll move on to now, air ground, isn't actually recognised as an air traffic service, but it is provided at quite a few smaller airfields. Again, no clearances, not even on the ground, just the very basic information that will give you things like the runway in use, the surface wind, and the pressure setting. They might be able to advise you of other aircraft reports. So 2 aircraft reported joining, 1 aircraft reported downwind, things like that. But you're not going to get detailed and accurate traffic information or advice from somebody providing a radio service. It's fair to say that some radio operators do sometimes overstep the mark, and it does feel like a bit like control, and it does feel a bit like information. So it's really difficult, it's really easy to get confused between the services you're getting. But air to ground, the very basic, the very simplest of service. So let's look at some of the standard words and phrases next. And there are 2 in particular that come up and we hear all the time and are often widely misused. These probably will come as no surprise to you. Roger, we hear it all the time. What it means: I have received all of your last transmission. That's it. That's all it means. Doesn't mean yes, doesn't mean no, doesn't mean maybe, certainly doesn't mean I will comply. It just indicates to the person who sent that message that I have received all of your last transmission. Moving that on, Wilco, I understand your message and will comply. Wilco is obviously the contraction of will comply. What doesn't it mean? It says on the slide, doesn't mean yes, doesn't mean no, doesn't mean maybe, doesn't necessarily mean understood. In fact, those 2 slides need to flip over, looking at those last 2 arrows. Roger doesn't mean understood. Wilco means I will comply. You can see the error on the slide. Wilco, I will comply with your clearance. I understand what you mean, and that's what I'm going to do.
There you go, Darren. It's not as if we checked this about 8 times before we did it.
No, exactly. Exactly. I'm sure it must have flipped around from our run through on.
Brilliant.
So
we've spotted it. Good.
Roger and Wilco, two of the key ones, but there are, of course, a whole load of other standard words and phrases that you'll find in CAP 413. And the trick to learning your RT is to know these words and phrases exactly. There is only about 30 of them, and they're pretty straightforward. You don't need to be in the aircraft with the engine turning and the money burning while you're learning these things. You can learn these at any point. You can learn them in the bath. You can give yourself clearance around the house. You can do all sorts of bits and pieces away from the aircraft to learn them. But my advice would be to learn them exactly. Know exactly what those definitions are, exactly what each of those words and phrases mean. So if you learn them verbatim, they become natural and instinctive in your transmissions, just like we're having this conversation now. And that table, those 30 odd words really do cover just about every eventuality that you'll come across. I promise you, this is pretty straightforward. There are a couple that are highlighted there that we really ought to focus on. Say again. Repeat all or the following part of your message. Say again all after hello. Say again whatever. If you're not sure what the controller has said, ask them to say again. I promise you, the controller will be much more inclined to be pleased with you asking us to say again, even if you have to say it 3 times, and know that you've got the right information rather than you have a guess at what you think was said. The other one, probably the most underutilized word in RT, unable. I cannot comply with your request, instruction, or clearance. ATC won't necessarily have the full picture of what's going in your cockpit. If you're given an instruction that might endanger your aircraft or that you cannot comply with for whatever reason, it's vital that you let the controllers know as soon as possible, usually with a brief reason. And it's their job then to formulate a revised plan and alternative clearance for you. So don't be frightened to use unable and say again, the 2 most important words I'd say in that list. With the follow-up from this webinar, Tabitha's going to send out that in a laminated version that you can know and love. But I promise you, learn those 30 words and the whole thing gets a hell of a lot easier. Okay, Matt, I think it's back to you.
Brilliant, Darren. Thank you very much. Some great things in there as well. There's some brilliant questions coming in on the thing as well. I won't pick them up now because some of them may fit quite nicely with some of the later sections that we're doing about Aerodrome RT and that as well. So without further ado, we'll move on to Dave as well. Telephone in the background has done, I don't know, kicked the computer or whatever magic she's done to see if the poll's working. So we'll also try a poll in this next section as well. But over to you, Dave. Right, things are going really well because over to you, Dave.
Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Yeah,
a few things going on. I think my internet's pretty stable. Hi everyone, it's nice to have us with you. And before we get into detail, let's start with a quick poll. Let's see if we can make a poll work. So, question: you're at the hold, and you receive following clearance: Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, runway 25, surface wind 270, 10 knots, cleared for takeoff. What's your response? A, balloon. Brilliant. Talitha, that's probably the wrong poll, but anyway. A, runway 25, cleared for takeoff, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. That's the one, nice one, thank you. B, cleared for departure, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. C, cleared for takeoff, wind 270, 10, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Or cleared for takeoff, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Let's have a think about that. Let's take a look at the results. Okay, well, the correct answer is A. Oh, it works. Nice. The correct answer is A. It's a clearance which includes a runway, so you've got to read that back, as well as the actual clearance to take off, but not the information, the wind in this case. A little bit more on that later. So let's go on to transmitting techniques themselves. First, have a good think about it. What you want to cover. What do you want to cover? Who else is talking at the time? Is the radio ready to go? Do you know what you're going to say? So before you press the button, check the receiver volume is set correctly. Listen out before you press the button. Don't forget that everyone's basically having a conversation with the controller at the end of the day. So before you butt in with your call, it's definitely considerate to wait for another conversation to finish first. Perhaps take a look around you too. There might be someone on very short finals about to touch down. And if so, if you've got time, perhaps let them concentrate until they're on the ground before you transmit, so they don't get distracted by your call. It's just about being nice and considerate, really. If you just change frequencies, it's definitely worth listening out for long enough to make sure no one's mid-conversation before you transmit. In fact, there's probably little else more irritating than if you're the one being stepped on. Anyway, as I said, have a good think about what you're going to say, and then, and only then, press the transmit switch when you're ready to speak and know what you're going to say. Yes, don't gabble. So Cap 413 guidance is around 100 words a minute, which is only around a couple of words a second, which is actually quite slow. So try and just use a normal conversational tone, speak clearly and distinctly, and try and avoid hesitation if you can, preferably with as few ers as possible, thinking about what you're going to say before pressing the button again. I actually like to teach new students to read out their first few transmissions from their kneeboard, especially the taxi and the rejoin call, only because they're the most complicated for newcomers. And once they've done it a few times, they'll learn the muscle memory, they'll know what they're saying, and they'll know what to expect. Perhaps try and keep your speaking volume to a constant level, so learn to listen to your transmission as you're making it too. What else? Be polite. Try and avoid too many courtesies and non-operational conversations. You probably all heard request change to approach. Thanks very much indeed for your service. Leaving the zone to the south at 2,000 feet. Have a great day. See you next time. Squawking conspicuity, which I can't even say. Blah, blah, blah. So there's nothing really wrong with just telling them changing to approach 128555. Thanks if you really must. Because otherwise the next call might just be Golf Alpha Bravo going round from another aircraft about to land, but they couldn't get their final call in time. So do think about that. It's a very common mistake. Another common mistake in newcomers is to forget to release the old transmit switch when you finish speaking. Early pilots often have to be just reminded to release the actual button, actually point at it, and they're suddenly aware that that's what they're doing. So yeah, in turn, then just think and listen out before you press the button. Keep the transmissions clear, concise, and paced, and remember to release the press to transmit button once you've finished. So let's move on to clearances, instructions, and information. What are they? Well, as we all know that RT, radiotelephony, is basically a two-way radio, the two-way radio pilots and ground personnel and vehicles use to talk to each other, rather obviously. But so that communications are clear and fully understood around the world, it's pretty crucial that all RT transmissions follow pretty much agreed procedures, international procedures, and phraseology, which are recognised, as I say, all around the world. In the UK, I mean, they might have different accents, of course, and have guys speaking in French before they hear a Brit come on the radio, and then suddenly they'll start talking English or not. In the UK, as I touched on earlier, we have to comply with the phraseology in Cap 413, and that goes to the military as well these days. So how do we know what to say then? Well, either it's like this. The RT messages are either clearances, instructions, or just useful information. If you're given a clearance, say clear to land, the rule is that a clearance readback has to follow strict compliance. So clearances have to be read back verbatim, and I'll give you a list of clearances later. If you're given instructions, say taxi to the apron via taxiway Charlie, these should be followed and carried out where, in inverted commas, where practically possible and safe to do so. And in most cases, should be read back if there's any chance of any ambiguity or misunderstanding. Wilco can be used, for example, to acknowledge short and unambiguous instructions, to keep the transmissions to a minimum, particularly if it's busy and everyone's desperate to get a call in. For example, Golf Alpha Bravo, report dead side descending, or Golf Alpha Bravo, report finals. Then Wilco, Golf Alpha Bravo is just fine. Lastly, of the three, information is given to assist the safe conduct of the flight and should not be read back, say surface wind 2608 knots, or there are 3 in the circuit, 1 crosswind, 1 late downwind, 1 on final. These are just information calls, and you can just acknowledge that with Golf Alpha Bravo or Roger, Golf Alpha Bravo. So clearances, instructions and information are all about the safe and expeditious operation of the aircraft, both on the ground and in the air, with minimal chatter, just clarity really. But we need to think about the elements of our transmissions, making sure only those elements that are required to be read back are actually read back. So as I said before, sorry, I've had a problem here. As I said before, try and avoid using long verbose transmissions and also the unnecessary retransmissions of simple instructions and informations. So on to the next slide. How do I get it right? You might think it all seems so complicated. I don't want to mess it up in front of everyone. Well, firstly, remember that everyone's in the same boat when they're learning. And so practicing on your own in the armchair, I've said this many times before on here, in the car, definitely all helps. Most schools will find a local RT procedures handout, and they'll give that to you to read and learn and practice, and all of that will help you to know what you're going to say, and then avoiding misunderstanding calls and knowing what to expect back, and then what to reply next, and all of that will help you save you having to repeat transmissions. Standard phraseology, it's true to say incidents and accidents have occurred in the past through non-standard phraseology. Contributing factors have been caused by pilots misunderstanding the important elements of messages and doing the wrong thing. So we use concise standard phraseology, as in Cat 413, and Darren gave those that list earlier. And we avoid long-winded transmissions. So it's well worth a refresh on the list that Darren gave you when you have time, part of your return to flying preparation if you've been off for a while. And Talitha's putting a link in that chat box for you now. Thanks, Tal. So let's have a look at a few examples of clearances, instructions and information and acknowledgement. So clearance, as I say, requires strict compliance and be read back verbatim. So Golf Charlie Delta, clear to land, reply, clear to land, Golf Charlie Delta, fairly straightforward. Instructions need to be followed and carried out where practically possible and safe to do so. So Golf Charlie Delta, report downwind, reply, Wilco, Golf Charlie Delta. I will comply, as we recall. So information and usefulness between the pilot and controller in the interest of safety. Golf Charlie Delta, service wind 240, 15 knots, reply, Golf Charlie Delta, Roger, or even just Golf Charlie Delta. Best to try to avoid messages such as Golf Charlie Delta, copy the weather, or Ghost Rider, copy the traffic, or worse still, Roger that. Which just goes to show that you watch Top Gun or Line of Duty even more than I do. So let's move on to slide 20, clearance issue and readback. Thank you. Clearances, they vary in content a lot, from a detailed description of the route and levels to be flown with frequencies and squawks, to a brief standard instrument departure, as SID, or just takeoff clearance. Unless you're at Kennedy, New York, where, to be fair, they're pretty busy, our trusty UK controllers will pass a clearance slowly and certainly clear enough for you to write it down, but only if you're ready. So just make sure that you are ready to write it down before you transmit. Goes without saying, really, but you'd be surprised, or possibly not. Usually route clearances are passed before start, and then the aircraft's full call sign is always used, which must be read back again as part of your reply. Remember, on an ATC route clearance, it's not an instruction to take off or enter an active runway. So it's simply a route clearance, so for an after takeoff clearance. And be aware that the phrase takeoff is only used when the aircraft's either cleared for takeoff or if the takeoff clearance is cancelled. All other times the word departure is used. Readbacks must always include the aircraft call sign. Take a look at the example on the screen there. So they read out the following clearance: Golf Alpha, Bravo Charlie Delta, after departure, cleared to the zone boundary, route via Echo, VFR not above altitude 2,000 feet, squawk 6522. And your reply should be, after departure, cleared to the zone boundary, VFR, via route Echo, VFR not above altitude 2,000 feet, squawk 6522, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. And they will say Golf Charlie Delta, read back correct. And you know you're good to go at that stage. So clearance issue and read back, ATS messages listed on the next slide must be read back in full by the pilot. So I'll let you read them. I'll point out a few. Taxi and towing instructions, yep. Level heading speed, clearances, approach clearances, etc., etc. If you make a mistake in the readback, the controller will transmit the word negative, followed by the correct version, sometimes several times. When they make an amendment to a clearance, then they will, the new clearance they'll give you in full and to you, but it automatically cancels any previous clearance. So still needs to be read back verbatim as before. On to the next slide, please. Critical information. This information which you must be given, but both for your safety and effective operation of your aircraft, and it must also be read back. So, for example, LVPs, low-vis procedures, wind shear, essential aerodrome information, I can't think of one off the top of my head at the moment, equipment and serviceability, and weather hazards, thunderstorms, hail, icing, etc. So that is the gist of those three main types of information, and I hope that all helps and is clear enough. If not, do feel free to put questions in the chat box. And in the meantime, back to you, Matt.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. We've got a few questions that might just pick up here. I might give Dave's voice a rest and ask Darren a few of these. We'll pick them up now as they've been coming on. Bradley's asked about, is it frowned upon by radar ATC to say squawk 7000 VFR instead of reading back squawk conspicuity? Now, I think this question comes up a lot, Darren, because of course we could be squawking a VFR or an IFR conspicuity code now as well. So what would you recommend is the readback when told squawk conspicuity?
Well, most air traffic controllers can't pronounce the word conspicuity like most pilots. It came about a couple of years now ago with the latest version of Cat 413. We're not going to die in a ditch if you say squawk 7000, but the differential is the fact that it's 2000 for IFR, 7000 for VFR. If you can't pronounce squawk conspicuity, squawk 7000, squawk 2000 will be absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Great answer. Another one, John's asked, what's the difference between monitor and standby for? Which is an interesting one.
Okay, so monitor, you're being told to listen out on a frequency. There's no need for you to call. What happens busy airfields where there might be a ground controller and a tower controller and an air controller looking after the runway, they'll tell you to monitor tower on 125.85, whatever it might be. All you need to do is flick your frequency over. The controller is expecting you to be on that frequency, and when they get the opportunity, they'll call you. So monitor, listen out on. Standby just means stop talking. I've got other things to do, whether I'm on the phone or I've got something else to deal with. You don't need to read it back. You just need to stay quiet and the controller will come back to you. So the monitor really applies to when a frequency is being changed or when you're changing a frequency. Happens quite a lot with the last frequencies around London, the Farnborough last frequency. You might be shuffling along on one frequency and all of a sudden they'll tell you to monitor Farnborough's on the other frequency. You don't have to call anything. They know you're on there. They just want you to listen out on the frequency.
Bill, and one final question I'll pick up builds on something Dave was talking about as well. Is there a set formula for clearances from ATC? Some people in the chat have mentioned craft as well, which I think is something that it's used for clearance delivery at larger airfields and things like that. But I think the answer is clearances from ATC will be context dependent, won't they, really, Darren? It depends on what they're clearing you for. It could be a fairly involved clearance for an IFR departure, or it could be a VFR arrival routing. So it's quite context dependent, I imagine.
It is. The general structure would have the clearance limit. So where you're cleared to go to, whether that's a holding point or the ground or entering the zone or leaving the zone, whatever, it normally comes with a clearance limit first, followed by the routing or the instructions to get there. And then they'd probably tag on any specific information, squawk or frequency, something like that. They do tend to become quite localized. So particular airfields will have a particular way of delivering that. It's written down in their manual of air traffic services, and that's how it will happen. But expect the clearance limit, where you can get to first, followed by how to get there and what they need you to do to comply, I think would be the general standard for it.
Brill. Thanks, Darren. Without further ado, we're going to go on to Darren's going to give us some insight into Aerodrome RT, and he's also going to give us some insight from the other side of the microphone as well, of the controller, which is some fascinating stuff. So over to you again, Darren.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Well, again, before we kick off, be honest here, folks. How confident are you using the radio? I know people who avoid flying in controlled airspace because they don't like using the radio and zigzag all around the country. They might as well just get in the car and drive. It's cheaper. If you can't fly in straight lines, it's not worth going. But what is your level of confidence? Be honest here. I was absolutely petrified the first time I spoke to an aeroplane. It was Golf Alpha Tango, Tango Kilo at Southend many, many years ago. It was landing on runway 24. It was so long ago, it's now runway 23. The magnetic variation has changed. But have a look at the poll there. Are you confident? Are you reasonably confident? Are you underconfident? Are you not confident at all? Do you avoid using the radio whenever you can? Okay, that's good. Third of you are saying that you are very confident, you are using it all the time. And quite a few of you obviously reasonably confident. Third of you, though, and a small percentage there, underconfident, feeling as though you need more practice, more understanding. I promise you, if you know Dave's list of readback items and my list of 30 standard words and phrases, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, well, let's look at it in an aerodrome sense and think about what's happening on around the airfield. It's really important, because obviously it's one of the places where most aircraft tend to congregate, and correct, timely RT can really help build situational awareness for you and for everybody else. Equally, poor RT can really cause mass confusion. If we look at taxi and takeoff specifically on the next slide, it is really important that we pay as much attention to our RT on the ground as we do in the air. Runway incursions, the unplanned presence of an aircraft on the runway or in its safety strip, are continuing to be a significant safety problem and have resulted in a number of fatal accidents around the world. Taxiing should be treated as a critical phase of flight. And we need to be as disciplined on the ground as we are in the air, particularly when it comes to our ground phraseology. Make sure that your passengers are briefed not to distract you while you're speaking on the radio, and have that fullest attention to what it is that you're doing. First and foremost, familiarise yourself with your aerodrome, where it is you're going. For licensed aerodromes, the AIP is your go-to document. A lot of the electronic software these days does have things like Skydemon, ForeFlight, etc. will take you directly to the current page of the AIP. Don't have a problem with printed flight guides. They are still out there, but don't forget, the moment they're printed, they're out of date. They're not going to give you the current and up-to-date note and information if they're in hard copy. Not everywhere has the AIP. Unlicensed fields or private strips might well have a website or a briefing document that outline the expected procedures, and it's always a good idea to have a look at those before you go. Again, looking at the AIP entry for your airfield might throw up a few pointers. Some airfields actually require you to request startup. Larger airports will often have an ATIS, Automated Terminal Information System, that enables you to listen in to the weather before you call up. And sometimes they'll have specific instructions for your first call, such as your parking location or your aircraft type. Often places like that will require you to book out or even potentially file a flight plan in advance. It's not just to make things awkward, it just means that ATC has your flight data in advance, cuts down the time on the RT when you actually call up and start transmitting. And saving time on the RT is absolutely key. If we look at the next slide, this is a very typical call at a full ATC airport, Gloucester here in this example, and no doubt you will have heard this many times. Gloucester Tower, this is Golf Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta. We're on the main apron. We've got information alpha. We've got the QNH of 1027, and we're requesting taxi. Instructions, please, for VFR flight to Dunkeswell with 2 persons on board. Lasted about 10 seconds. Is it okay? Can we improve it? Yeah, absolutely. Let's see what we can take out of that on the next slide. Look at all the stuff that's been crossed out. Gloucester Tower, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, main apron, information alpha, QNH 1027, request taxi. I've halved that transmission, taken out the time of taking out all the unnecessary words and half the time of that actual transmission. In this example, we don't need to pass our destination or our POB because we've already booked out with ATC and got the details. People on the front desk who've taken your landing fee, have asked you where you're going next, taken all that detail. ATC has all that available to them. Why is saving RT time so critical? Well, to be honest, the skies aren't full of aeroplanes, but the airwaves are full of nonsensical chatter a lot of the time. I looked at this back in 2017 when I was preparing a presentation for the local clubs at Gloucester. And that year, Gloucester handled 17,000 departing VFR flights. If we save 5 seconds of chatter every time an aircraft taxis, we save 17,000 times 5 seconds, which is 85,000 seconds, 1,416 minutes, 23.61 hours, a whole day of unnecessary waffle just by keeping it brief and concise. So let's have a look at a similar scenario on the next slide at an AFIS aerodrome. Hope you get information. Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, grass parking, request taxi, VFR to Sherburn, 2 POB. Why have we added the extra bits and pieces in? Well, we might not necessarily have booked out in the same way. Some airfields don't require you to book out, and I don't think Halfpenny Green does. You just call up on the radio with that basic information. And where we're going, the number of persons on board, all that type of stuff, airports have to record that data and keep those records. So we're at an AFIS airfield. Remember, AFIS has authority over taxiing aircraft on the ground, and much like ATC, they'll give you instructions in the same way. So in this example, Golf Alpha Charlie Delta, taxi holding point Alpha 2, runway 30, QNH 1014. I think as Dave said, in both cases, be ready to receive them. Expect something to come back when you make that taxi call, but listen very carefully. Write them down if you need to. Absolutely no problem with that. Never assume. If you're in any doubt, check by using the phrase, say again. So in this example, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, taxi holding point Alpha 2, runway 30, QNH 1014. What are you going to read back? Well, quite simply, you're going to read back everything. Your call sign, your clearance limit, your taxi instructions are a mandatory readback item. The runway in use, that's a mandatory readback item. And the altimeter setting is a mandatory readback item too. So as Dave said with that list, the numbers are generally a good thing to read back, apart from the surface wind. And any clearance is a mandatory readback item. Let's look at this same scenario then, but in an air-ground environment. Enstone radio, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, request airfield information, VFR to Northfield, 2 POB. Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, runway 26, wind 260 degrees, 7 knots, QNH 1012. So an air ground call sign radio, you're going to get the basic information, the runway in use, the wind, the pressure setting. Don't expect anything else. You're not going to get it. Don't wait for taxi clearance, taxi instructions. That's not going to happen. You're going to tell them what you're doing. Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, runway 26, QNH 1012, taxi holding point Alpha. Technically, you don't even need to read back that. It's not an air traffic service. It's not it's not monitored in that way. So technically, you wouldn't need to read it back. However, instilling those good habits, reading back the things that you have to, is a good thing. It's really good practice to do that. Bearing in mind that the person who's operating the radio service might not even be looking out the window, probably isn't looking out the window, might not even be on the radio. Following a number of incidents in recent years, the CAA are encouraging radio operators to have a view over the airfield and be manned at all times when the airfield is promulgated as open, but it isn't necessarily the case. So we've got ourselves to the holding point. Let's look on the next slide at takeoff. As Dave said earlier, you should only use the word takeoff when you are required to a specific ATC clearance to do so. And a takeoff clearance must be passed separately from any other clearance. So quite simply, if you don't hear the words takeoff, don't. When you report ready for departure, you should expect the following. In the ATC environment, Golf Charlie Delta, runway 23, clear for takeoff, surface wind. Even if there's only one runway at the airfield, ATC is still required to tell you which runway you're departing from. That's to get us into this habit of preventing runway incursions. What you're going to read back? Well, it's got a runway, it's a clearance, runway 23, clear for takeoff, Golf Charlie Delta. In the AFIS environment, remember, AFIS will give you clearance up to the holding point, but the runway is your job. So here we go. You've reported ready for departure. They tell you Golf Charlie Delta, Cessna reported base leg, runway 23, take off at your discretion. You need to look out the window, decide whether you've got time to get ahead of that Cessna as reported on base leg. And in this example, I'm assuming that we have, and you tell them what you're doing. Runway 23, taking off, Golf Charlie Delta. In the air ground environment, you've called ready for departure. Technically speaking, you don't need to. However, good practice. No reported traffic, surface wind 230 degrees 8 knots, roger, taking off, Golf Charlie Delta. And that adds to situational awareness for anybody else who might be in the circuit or on the frequency, particularly in the AFIS and the air ground cases, so they know where to expect you. And we are only using takeoff when we are on the runway and about to roll. Really important to bear in mind that in that AFIS and in that air ground scenario, the decision to take off is yours. The information that you get, however, should be used to influence your decision. If they tell you Cherokee reported final, what they probably mean is it's safer for you to wait. Okay, so that's us airborne and on our way. Let's look at joining RT on our next slide. Initial call to your destination really can be quite simple. Firstly, you need to establish communications, but you can actually use that initial call to make your basic request. If in the ATC environment and if the airfield has ATIS, probably worth listening in and writing down the details before you're making your call. But you can see in this example, I've gone with a pretty straightforward example. Gloucester approach, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, request join. That's all I want to do. If I've filed a flight plan or booked in and Gloucester's gone PPR in the last few years, so they should know you're coming, they will almost certainly have your details already and might just ask you to report your position and level, etc. I've gone with Golf Charlie Delta passing message. We're assuming that they don't know that you're coming. And I've gone with the example here. Golf Alpha Delta, Cessna 152 from Shoreham, Cirencester, 3,000 feet, information Zulu. Telling them that I've listened to their ATIS weather, telling them where I am, telling them what my level is, giving them the basic information. If I then end up in a field with my engine not working and the ATC can't raise me, they knew I was coming from Shoreham. They knew I was last at Cirencester. They've got a good starting point to look for me if it's all gone a bit quiet on the frequency. If your destination is within controlled airspace, you may quite frequently initially be instructed to remain outside controlled airspace. And that's it's a lack of a clearance. So technically, it still needs a readback. Why do controllers say that? It's not because we're grumpy. It's because we have to. If we can't clear you in immediately, we must tell you to remain outside controlled airspace. And in many circumstances, we should give you a time when you can expect an onward clearance. But that's why we tell you to remain outside controlled airspace, because them's the rules. We have to do that. We're not just being bolshy, I promise. If you're met with a pass your message, keep it concise. As I said, the example I've gone here, call sign Cessna 152 from Shoreham, Cyrus Cessna 3,000 feet. See, I even added a QNH to that. I've got it from Information Zulu. But the fact of the matter is, I'm going to be given a pressure setting in the next transmission anyway. So I've kept it really simple, and I'll read that back next time. Same format would apply to zone transits. Bristol radar, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, request zone transit. They know what to expect. They know what type of strip, what type of information to record and write down. Just makes the whole process so much easier from a controller's perspective. Outside controlled airspace, airfields with ATC will ask you what type of service you require. Generally speaking, it's going to be a basic service or a traffic service if we're VFR. It's a type of service. It's on the mandatory list. You have to read it back. When you enter controlled airspace with a clearance, of course, you'll be told that you are under radar control. And that's a type of service, so that needs a readback too. Expect to be told you're under radar control the moment you enter controlled airspace. Okay, let's look at joining in the AFIS or air-ground environment. So we've gone with Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, joining from the west. Golf Alpha Charlie Delta, runway 23, QNH 1011. Good practice to read those back, and we're going to report when we get to the overhead or whatever the significant report is associated with that. You're going to receive the information about the runway news, the weather, the pressure setting, and possibly other reported traffic, but it's for you to decide how you join. Look at the published procedures before you get airborne. Some airfields require you to join in particular locations. The default join is the overhead join. The default circuit direction is left hand. So if you've got no other information to the contrary, that's what you ought to be doing. At ATC airfields, you might be asked to report at a specific geographical place or a distance from the airfield. Report 5 miles, report passing the bends in the river was always a good one at Gloucester. In the circuit, of course, there are 2 mandatory calls to make, downwind and final. At non-ATC airfields, however, it's good practice, and it may actually be required at some places, to report overhead and on each leg of the circuit, just to aid the situational awareness of everybody else that's out there operating in the circuit. So let's look at those circuit positions on this next slide. Really important that you accurately report your position in the circuit at the standard points. If you don't, you degrade the situational awareness of other aircraft, both in the circuit and those joining and on the ground. So the downwind position is a beam, the upwind end of the runway. If you don't get your call in there, by default, you're a late downwind, and that can be at any point on that extended leg. Once you make your 90-degree turn, I don't make a 90-degree turn, I fly a cub, so I fly a nice curving approach all the way around so I can see what's going on. But once I make that turn from downwind, I'm on base leg. And when I get to final, I'm on final. There is only one final. There's no such word as finals. It is only in the singular. And the definition of long final is beyond 4 miles. There is no such thing as short final. It's a mythical place. You hear a lot of people talking about short final. Not defined, doesn't exist. Half-mile final, quarter-mile final is a much better pronunciation for from a controller's perspective. Okay, let's look at the biggest bugbears from the controller's perspective in the next slide. Remember, air traffic controllers, you're a customer. It's a customer service. It's one where the customer isn't always right, trust me, but your landing fees are paying their wages. You are a customer, and it's a service that you should be receiving. What are the big problems? Readbacks. Controllers will ask you to read back anything that you should have but didn't. And we'll ask you over and over again until we know you've got that right information. Not complying with your clearance. Very few pilots actually do this deliberately. The common response in most subsequent debriefs that I've dealt with and instant reports is, I thought you meant me to, I thought you wanted me to do this. If you're in any doubt, ask ATC to say again. They'd much rather repeat themselves 3 times and know that you got the right information rather than you misinterpret it and get something wrong. And remember, if you're unable to comply, let ATC know as soon as possible. The magic word, the standard word is unable. Controllers can't see what's going on in the cockpit, and we won't know if you're about to enter cloud or too high, too low, whatever it might be. We rely on you to tell us so we can come back to you with an alternative plan. Final bugbear, leaving the frequency. If you don't report changing to as you leave a controller's area, they're duty bound to make sure that you haven't crashed, and they should take overdue action to trace you. That can be really time consuming. If you've gone beyond the radio range and can't sign off with the controller, you've gone beyond the high ground, happened just all the time at Gloucester when people got east of the Cotswolds. Ask the next unit that you speak to, or even a relay and aircraft in the air, to pass on to ATC that you're leaving their frequency. Saves a lot of unnecessary work for controllers. On the plus side, if you do find yourself forced landed in the field, it's reassuring to know that it's mandatory for controllers to start this overdue action, this alerting service. It comes free of charge with your air traffic control service, and hopefully you'll get the assistance that you need. Okay, I think that's back to you then, Matt.
Darren, brilliant. Loads of information there as well. And this is one of the benefits of getting this on YouTube afterwards. So you can play back and look at some of this or replay some of this because we were rare. There's a lot of information to get across here, but we're trying to cover there with Darren. There's a few questions that lots of people have been asking. So we'll pick those up now as well. Some comments on phraseology about taking off at an air ground, and that is correct. If you look in the CA safety sense leaflet or Cat 14, that is the correct phraseology to use. People have commented, shouldn't you say departing, lining up, or whatever? The issue is with saying things like departing rather than taking off, and Darren can correct me on this as well, is it could actually mean departing the ATZ or departing to the west or whatever. It can be confused, whereas taking off is an actual specific action, meaning you're on the in-use runway and rolling for the takeoff. So that is why it is takeoff. I think that's correct, isn't it, Darren?
Yeah, absolutely. The use of the takeoff word limited to clearances or the physical act of taking off, and it's for the situational awareness. The guy on final will look on the runway to see you rolling. The guy downwind will position themselves accordingly based on what you're doing. It's all about building up that 3D picture for everybody who's listening out on the radio. And
a few comments as well on the need to give the POB on AFIS or air ground as well. I believe, is that just to do with the airfield operator's duty of care of logging it, or is it a local requirement, or is it an actual requirement? There's quite a few comments on that.
Okay, from a UK perspective, it's technically not a requirement. A lot of airfields will ask for it because they have certain obligations in the event of an issue or a problem, and the scale of their emergency response might vary from the number of depending on the number of people you got on board. Gloucester, for example, if it was a single seat aircraft or something with 2 seats, the turnout that the local fire service would send was less than if it was a 4-seater or a 10-seater or whatever. So having that information immediately to hand if it goes pear-shaped is just really helpful, really useful for air traffic units, and I'm sure it applies at smaller airfields too. If they've got any form of emergency response, knowing the basic details from the outset makes it really helpful. It's a mandatory thing for the military. I think it always has been, Matt. You'll be asked all the time at prize events.
Yeah, that's right. So not specifically a requirement, but common practice, I think, is perhaps the way to answer that. Thanks for those who asked about that. And we had loads of questions on this as well. So sorry to pick on you again, Darren, because it was sort of in your bit. Lots of people commenting and worrying or wondering about the call sign at the beginning or the end And I think we're talking here about the difference between a readback or a response, aren't we, Darren? So perhaps you could clarify that on us as well. And people have picked up in some of our examples, we give the call sign on the readback or the response first. Sometimes it's at the end. And I think it is that difference between a readback or a response. Is that right?
Yeah, that's probably the simplest way to describe it. Think about the conversation. It's who you're talking to,
Yeah.
and how it ends. You start off as a controller by talking to a particular aircraft, Golf Alpha Bravo do this, and you want to know at the end of the conversation that Golf Alpha Bravo is blah, 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 Golf Alpha Bravo. Think of it as, I think of it as brackets around it, and follow the logic that you've had with the clearance from particularly from an air traffic control point of view.
Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, readback or a response. Hopefully that will tell you where to put the call sign. Hopefully that makes it a bit clearer for something. But again, Darren, Dave, I think you'll agree, you know, ultimately you don't want to get totally stressed and wound up about this, do you? It's about getting that information, getting that contract of information back. And if the call sign's at the beginning or the end on a readback, the controller just wants to know, but the information's got back and been understood. I think that's probably fair, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The right aircraft's got the right information and read back the key things. Those standard words and phrases, those readback items, that's all you need.
Brilliant.
I
Okay.
use the idea, as Darren says, as you know, if you're talking to them, you refer to them first, and if they've told you to do something, you reply and then put your call sign at the end. That's how I teach it, and it's a conversation at the end of the day. Works well.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for raising that. Good discussion. Right, what we're going to do now is move on to the quiz. Like I say, we don't record answers to this. Don't get stressed about it. This is just to pull out some discussion points as we go, and then we'll wrap up some of the Q&A and some of the great questions that are coming in, but we haven't had in order to get through yet. We'll see how this works. Polls are hopefully working and sorted, so we'll see. I think Dave and Darren are going to kind of bat and ball this, so we'll see how we get on. Dave, do you want to launch this first one?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Okay, we'll start the quiz. I've basically taken 10 PPL questions from the comms syllabus. So here's question 1, straight out of the syllabus. Pilot experiencing receiver failure should prefix their calls with which phrase? A lot of these, for anyone that's still taking exams, is be really careful to read the question, because that's the easiest way to not reading it accurately is an easy way of getting it wrong. Anyway, blind broadcast, transmitting blind, speechless aircraft, and transmitting twice. What do we think there? A couple more seconds on that. Okay, the correct answer is B, and a few people thought A. Fair enough. Transmitting blind. You can transmit, but you can't hear, so you're transmitting blind. At the end of the day, it is logical. It's only referring to when you think you have a receiver failure, perhaps because it's all gone quiet. But before you transmit, first check your volume, which might have been accidentally turned down for some reason. Or even double check the frequency, because you might just have accidentally caught the frequency change button. That happens much more regularly than an actual receiver failure. But if it's all correct and really is receiver failure, then air traffic might still be able to hear you. So just tell them what you intend to do and tell them that you're transmitting blind. In other words, you can't hear them. Squawk 7600, that's good. And perhaps make a standard overhead join back at your airfield, making all the blind calls in the normal place, looking out for other aircraft in the pattern, building your situational awareness, and look at the tower for a green light signal or a green flare as a clearance to land, if they do that at your airfield. Over to you, Darren. Question 2.
Okay, question 2 then. So you're inbound to an airfield and you've been cleared to join on right base for runway 26, and the approach controller tells you to contact XXXX tower on 119.155. What should your initial call be on that new frequency? 4 options there. Tower Charlie Delta with you, joining right base, runway 26. Tower Golf Alpha Charlie Delta. Tower Golf Charlie Delta with you, 119.155. Tower Charlie Delta right base. 4 options, all of which you will have heard at some point. Click your answers and let's see what we come up with there. Okay, fair old mix there. Quite a few of you've gone for with you joining right base runway 26. Few of you have gone across the spectrum there. Look at the phrase itself. You've been told to contact XXX tower on 119.155. Once you've learned those standard words and phrases, you'll know that contact means established communications with, your details have been passed. So the tower controller knows you're joining on right base, knows who you are. All you need to do on that frequency is check in with your call sign. XXXX tower, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. They already know that you're joining right base. They already know what you're doing. Is with you is a pet peeve of a lot of air traffic controllers. We know you're with us. You're talking on our frequency. And you don't need any other details there. You are simply checking in on the frequency because the word contact has been used. Your details have been passed. Okay, I think.
Yeah, I've spoken about 3 different frequencies yesterday. I was having a box selection faff in an aircraft I wasn't familiar with. So yeah, I know the problems there then. But just to add to that, Darren, just to ask, a lot of people have asked in the Q&A and that as well about whether they should actually give information they've got. So, request join, runway 19, QFE or QNH 1002. So should people give information they've already got on their initial calls, or should they really be waiting for the controller to give it and then read back? Have you any thought on that?
On the initial call, keep it as brief as possible. Request join, request zone transit, whatever it might be. The controller might be busy doing other stuff, and they're going to give you the weather and the information, all those bits and pieces, because they have to get a read back off them. So just keep it simple on that initial call. Otherwise, it's unnecessary duplication of information that's already there. Some complex airfields, Cardiff, for example, if you fly down there, the ATIS says, upon first contact, report your information Zulu and your aircraft type. So Cardiff radar, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, PA28, information Zulu, inbound. So listen to the ATIS, get the specifics, but otherwise keep it really, really simple.
But it's fair to say that even in that case, Darren, the controller would have to establish that you got the correct QNH or whatever by a readback, wouldn't they? Even if you told them you've got that information, yeah. Yeah,
absolutely.
So yeah, so good questions on that. Hopefully that answered those people that are asking those questions. Back to Dave. Question 3.
Okay, we'll just make sure we've nailed this one. So what does the word Roger mean? Hopefully you've all got it by now, but yes, cleared for takeoff or cleared to land. I've received all of the last transmission and will do. So I'll give you a couple of nanoseconds on that one. So the correct answer is C. Yeah, hopefully you've all got that now. It doesn't mean yes, although that's still what the Americans say in the movies. I think of it as understood. That's it. Back to you, Darren.
Okay, question 4 then. So you're planning to transit a control zone en route, and the controller that you're currently talking to instructs you to free call XXX radar on 119.005, and that's the zone who you'd like to transit. What's your initial call going to be on that new frequency? Which kind of answers the question that we just had, really. So 4 options there. Full call sign on frequency 119.005. With you for zone transit. Hopefully I've already told you that with you is a pet peeve that we stab voodoo pencils into your call sign if you use. Request zone transit, or are we going in with all the information there? Shopton to Compton, Anvers, overhead, Little Town, 2,000 feet, VFR, request zone transit. So a few more seconds to come up with your answer there. Yeah, again, the majority of you going with answer C, the very simple XXXX radar, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, request zone transit. And in that simple transmission, you've given the controller enough information for them to determine what they're going to do with you. I'll be honest, if you sound really nervous and numpty and you got all of those other bits and pieces wrong, your chances of a zone transit is probably diminishing because they've got to trust you within their controlled airspace. But keep it simple like that. You got a fighting chance of getting through. Okay, back to you, Dave, I think.
Thanks. Question 5. What does the phrase read back mean? A, let me know what you've heard and understood this message. Check and confirm with the originator. Did you correctly hear the last message? And repeat all. Can't read that. The specified part of this message back to me exactly as received. Give you a second on that one. And the correct answer is D, absolutely. Repeat all the specified part of this message back to me exactly as received.
So read back Q&A, things like that.
Usually given as the at the end of a clearance, squawk 1234, contact London 123450, read back, and you just read back exactly what they said. Back to you, Darren.
Okay, next question. Again, this came up earlier, but good to cover again. A controller instructs you to monitor XXXX on frequency 124.275. What should you call beyond that frequency? Remember, monitor, listen out on. What should you do? Should you check in with your call sign? Should you put on frequency? Should you stick the frequency numbers in there, or should you say nothing at all? Okay, a few more seconds for your thoughts on that one. Yeah, vast majority say nothing, monitor, listen out on frequency. There's no need for you to call. The controller is there, busy working away, knows you're listening out on their frequency, and when they're ready to call you, they'll do exactly that. So great, 78% of you got that. Learning has been achieved.
Question 7. So when is a pilot permitted to abbreviate a call sign? It's a good question. It happens all the time, of course. A, only after ATC is abbreviated first. B, on the second transmission. C, if there's no other aircraft on frequency. And D, anytime you're talking to an air-to-ground station. So have a think about that. And the answer was A, only after ATC has abbreviated it first. Basically, once they've called you helicopter Charlie Delta, for example, you can reply with it. Before that, it's helicopter Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Actually, no, if you're a helicopter, the correct abbreviation is helicopter Charlie Delta rather than helicopter Golf Charlie Delta. Whereas if you're using call sign Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, the correct abbreviation would be Golf Charlie Delta. Back to you, Darren.
Yeah, key thing with that one specifically is that there may well be other Charlie Deltas on the frequency that you haven't heard listening out. So ATC won't abbreviate it if that's a possibility. Okie dokie, question 8 then. You're flying into a little grass strip with no published frequency and you elect to use safety com on 135.480. What should you do when what call should you make when you're downwind left hand? So a couple of options there. Remember, safety comms all about situational awareness for everybody else using that frequency at the same time. So you've got 4 options there. Have a think, which one would you go for? Okay, and the correct answer, bottom one again, small field traffic, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, left-hand downwind 27, small field. Key thing is we're putting the name of the airfield that we're going to at the end of the transmission as well. We're bracketing the whole thing so that people know that we're at the same airfield as them. You will find this quite often with safety com, particularly high pressure situations where you've got any atmospheric ducting and things like that going on. You'll hear lots of people calling on safety com in relatively short distances. So making sure we're getting the name of the airfield at the start and the end of the transmission makes it clear to everybody that which airfield, which little airstrip it is you're using. Yeah, good spread of answers there, but yeah, the key is bracketing it with the with the name at the start and the end.
And Dan, we've had a few questions asking about can you use traffic on an air ground? So, you know, I don't know, end-zone traffic, the whatever reporting and that as well. I think strictly speaking, there's no actual requirement to do that if it's a air ground frequency, even if there's nobody responding on the air ground radio. I think that you don't have to add traffic, you just make the calls, I believe is correct.
You just make the calls to the published air ground frequency, end-zone radio, whatever it might be. I totally understand the confusion when it isn't being monitored or it isn't being been replied to, but you should, if it's promulgated as available, then you should be using that. Air ground's a bit of a grey area because it's not recognised by the CAA or internationally as an air traffic service, but we kind of apply some of the same rules and procedures to it. And the CAA have looked into kind of beefing up the way that it's delivered and making sure that it is monitored and available with somebody on the radio when it's published as being used. But no, you should use the radio call sign when you're on an air ground frequency.
And I believe there has been some safety communications from the CA recently reminding air ground radio station operators of their responsibilities to actually monitor and respond. I think that was in response to a couple of accidents as well, wasn't it? So I think there is a bit of a focus on that at the minute as well, Darren, as you allude to there. So yeah,
there is, and there's I think we're going to see fairly substantial shake-ups coming down the line with the future of air traffic services across the UK, particularly with things like electronic conspicuity and flight planning. It will be, it should be much better. The rest of the world manages it really well. We can hopefully fall into line.
Well, Dave, question 9, almost there.
Question 9. So what's the correct reply to the call standby? Immediately say nothing. Standby, Golf Charlie Delta, affirm, or Wilco? Have a think about that. And the answer is A, say nothing. Let's have a look at the poll results out of interest. That's great. That's absolutely getting through, isn't it? Someone suggested standby or Wilco. You don't have to say anything at all. Standby means just that. They're either busy, perhaps on the phone, or they need to talk to someone else more urgently than you right now. Simple as that. Back to you, Darren.
Yeah. The word standby means wait, I will call you. Okay, final question then, and this is one that you might come across at an air traffic control airfield. It's only available at ATC airfields. Control instructs you to land after a preceding aircraft which is still on the runway. When can you land? So 4 options there. When that preceding aircraft has vacated the runway's width. When that preceding aircraft has passed the runway holding point, when you consider it safe to do so, or you can't, you have to go around. What do we mean by land after? Only the domain of controllers. AFIS and air ground can't give you a land after, but air traffic control can. And if you haven't flown from an ATC airfield, you might not necessarily know this one, but land after. Have a stab. What are your thoughts on that one? Okay, and the correct answer for that one, good, very widespread across there. A land after you can use when you consider it safe to do so. Land after is exclusively the remit of ATC, as I've said, and they can issue a land after instructions only during daylight hours if they consider there's sufficient space for it to happen. The runway is not contaminated with snow or ice or rain or anything like that. The preceding aircraft isn't going to stop on the runway and it's not going to need to backtrack the runway. But the decision to accept that clearance rests with you, the pilot. If you don't think there's enough room, you're going to go around. What the controller is effectively saying to you is, I think this is going to work. You're cool. You will only find it, as I say, at controlled aerodromes in receipt of an air traffic control service, but it does keep things flowing quite efficiently and flexibly. We used to have to use this all the time at Gloucester, where runway occupancy was really, really high back in the day. But the land after is putting it back to you. It's giving you the option when you consider it safe to do so. And it doesn't mean, as I saw once with one particular aircraft, that you need to keep your aircraft in the flare and hover along the runway at 6 feet until the one ahead has vacated. If you think there's enough room, you can land, and the controller will only give you that option if they think it's going to work in the first place, subject to those parameters that I mentioned.
And Darren, some people have just asked, does that mean you won't get a landing clearance? That's correct. That land after is your landing clearance. That's correct, isn't it?
It's the lack of a landing clearance. It's effectively an instruction, but you're not going to get a clearance. No, it's sometimes really helpful from a phraseology point of view. If it's going to be a really tight gap and you need to talk to somebody else, you'd issue a land after, and then you can go and issue your clearance to somebody else, and that can just happen without having to have control of the radio at that exact moment when you need to use the clearance. It's a tool for flexibility, really.
Brilliant. Thanks. We have a whole bunch of questions. There's some absolutely brilliant questions. We won't be able to get through all of them, so I'm going to try and pick up on some of the themes that we've got coming in tonight. Quite a few people asking about a traffic service or getting traffic information. So I think we're talking here about air traffic control services outside, outside the controlled environment here, but potentially inside the environment as well. And as I understand it, and I'll let Darren correct me or not, the correct phraseology in the UK anyway is traffic in sight or traffic not sighted. That's correct, isn't it, Darren? I don't think there's any variations.
That is the current UK version, which is I think virtually unique to the UK. And personally, I think it's a little bit clunky. But yeah, traffic in sight or traffic not sighted are the correct responses. Other countries use looking, which I think is actually quite good. But traffic not sighted, traffic in sight should be your responses in those circumstances.
And interestingly, in my work role as well, what we used to often say is traffic not sighted, but held on TAS or on TCAS or something like that. And a standardization, we've just been criticized and stopped from doing that. But we used to think it was helpful to let the controller know we can't see it visually, but we can see, or we're tracking the other traffic on our TCAS or TAS systems. But from a standardization point of view at work, we've just been stopped from doing that. Interestingly, Darren, I don't know whether you've picked that up or seen that phraseology creeping in with kind of radar services.
It's really common for people to do it. Yeah, we've got him on TCAS. We're monitoring it on that. Technically, it's non-standard. Any mention of TCAS might be confused as a TCAS RA and some of the specific words associated with that. So no, technically speaking, it shouldn't be used. Situational awareness point of view, from controller's perspective, I guess it is helpful, but technically speaking, it's wrong and potentially confusing. A lot of us are flying around now with pilot aware and all of the avionics, all the other various bits and pieces that are giving us this great 3D picture. But technically, we should keep it to traffic not sighted or traffic in sight. Bearing in mind that under a traffic service, the controller will only pass you traffic the once normally, unless they consider it to be a significant risk of things getting worse. So you might not necessarily get updated. Again, in the future airspace strategy and things coming along down the line, I think we're going to see a much more simplified, much more sensible process than what we currently have as traffic and deconfliction and basic service.
Brilliant. Yeah, and somebody's just asked if traffic not sighted is a requirement to report when sighted. Yes, you should update the controller when you have the traffic in sight, because otherwise the controller may continue to issue you with traffic information. So when they know that you've visually acquired it, they'll start doing that. Loads of questions flying in. I know Dave's been monitoring in the background as well. Thanks, Dave. About the land after and that as well. Darren, correct me again if we're wrong, but yes, the other aircraft is still on the runway. It is still occupying the runway. That's quite correct. That is exactly what the land after is all about. So some people are kind of, yeah, it is an occupied runway.
I've flown into lots of little grass strips, and people have landed on the runway behind me, technically illegally. ATC have this land after option to improve that runway occupancy and allow more than one aircraft on the runway at the same time. It's the only legal way that you can land on an occupied runway with a land after clearance. Clearance, perhaps the wrong word, it's a lack of a clearance. It's an instruction. It's helpful from a controller's point of view. If you read back land after or Wilco is fine. I will comply with that instruction. Just so that we know that we've got what you shouldn't read back is clear to land, because you're not. There's an aircraft on the runway. Don't read back clear to land if you get a land after. Wilco or land after will be really helpful.
Dave, as it popped to you, some people have often commented in the questions and the chat about controllers and other people speaking very fast, or even controllers getting grumpy with them or worse. Have you got any advice to students when they find that people are speaking too fast, or they feel people are getting grumpy with them on the RT? What advice do you give to your students?
Well, I've never known a grumpier trafficker in my entire life, of course. I would, well, because Darren, I haven't seen you at the tower for ages. I would say what I always get the guys to do is just relax. You know, if they said something wrong, they're going to say something wrong. They probably need to practice a bit harder in terms of getting used to what to say and what to expect. If you continually get it wrong, air traffickers shouldn't get frustrated. And to be honest, it's pretty rare. It means they're very busy. But no, I would just totally ignore. I definitely wouldn't get into a conflab with them. I would just listen to what they say and try and comply. Darren, do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, let's be honest. Controllers have bad days too, and I have worked with people who have got grumpy and have got annoyed by various bits and pieces. There are all sorts of different people in all sorts of different walks of life who have that character trait. But we are taught that we keep it standard, we keep it professional, and we don't get involved in arguments on the RT. If it really is problematic, once you're on the ground and away from the aircraft, take it up there and report it if needs be. But I promise you, we'd much rather you asked us to say again 3 or 4 times and get the right information than you assume something wrong and do something different.
And some people have helpfully reminded us as well, the student call sign is available if you are a student and wish to make that clear. And hopefully everybody, there was a student flying into Oxford the other day. It was very, very busy traffic situation. They called up using student. I was on frequency as well. And it was quite obvious that the controller really held their hand through them joining through a very busy, complicated, unusual joining clearance. So it really worked for them, and the controller responded brilliantly. So yeah, to that. So it was good. Very last question before we wrap up, and I'd love to take more, but we are going to finish on time. Is just people asking about their intentions when you call downwind or final whatever, as in like touch and go or land. Certainly I teach and I've always been taught yes to include intentions there as well. Darren, is that always the case, including intentions for with the downwind call? Or
if you're doing anything other than the landing, yes, it's helpful. If you are going to do a touch and go or a go around, helps the controller plan the sequence accordingly. If you're downwind to land, I wouldn't bother. I would just say downwind, and the controller will expect you're going to land unless you've already told them otherwise. So it's not wrong. It helps situational awareness, and I don't think any of us are going to die in a ditch over it. But downwind, touch and go, and we like to do this, and we want to do that, and we want to do 3 more of those, and can we have a cup of coffee when we land? That's when it starts to get problematic in terms of the the RT use.
Brilliant. I think the Americans use cleared for the option. I had an American airfield the other day, which really confused me, but apparently that means I could land, touch and go, or do or a low approach, whatever I wanted, apparently, which is an American. I got that at a USAF airfield the other day, unexpectedly, I have to say.
Very pragmatic.
But there we go. Great. So top 10 takeaways. I'll let you read those. Those of you on the video might want to pause and have a look at that. I think we've covered all of those as well. And just that last one at the bottom, because we perhaps haven't emphasized that as much as the others. Don't leave the frequency without telling the controller because that gives Darren and his friends all sorts of chase up, follow up actions, but distract them from what they should be doing if you disappear off without telling them. So great. Thank you all for coming. Brilliant engagement, brilliant questions as ever. And we do really appreciate your engagement, your questions that you submit via email or via other social media means as well. It's great to have that engagement and hear what's troubling you or what you think out there in industry and in the community. Like I said, there'll be a replay of this workshop. It was sent to you via email with a list of the resources that we've talked about in the session tonight as well. And once we finish in a minute, so a survey result will pop up. Please take the time to fill this in. Your feedback is genuinely valuable to us, and it allows us to shape what people would like to see coming in the future there as well. And there's some more contact details coming up in the chat there as well. If you're wondering what's next, keep an eye out. It's been safe around the airfield to build on some of this. That's going to be the next event coming up. You'll get information on Skywise or through our website on this as well. All that remains there is for me to thank Dave and Darren. It's absolutely great to have your experience here, and especially Darren from both sides of the microphone, absolutely invaluable. So thanks, gents, for joining us as well. And Talitha in the background. Thank you for keeping us on track and kicking the computer to get the polls working. Did a great job with that as well. Other than that, I'd like to just wish everybody a great evening. And if you see any of us around and about industry or airfields, do come say hi, do come engage with us and let us know, meet us out and about as well. And hopefully we'll catch up with some of you on some more of our workshops going forward. Thank you all very much. Take care. Safe flying. Good evening.
Yes.